Alrighty, so we've got set 4 teasers out last Wednesday. There was this big stream from FFG showcasing the new Spotlight decks. They're kind of starter set adjacent, very similar. I think they're just standalone products with the starter set leaders and the Spotlight cards that are in them that will be exclusive to these intro packs. Got a few other cards that are not just locked into these set as well. So I'm going to review all these cards, all the new mechanics. I know it's very early. We're only about a month in to set 3's lifespan. So we have quite a few months before this set completely launches. But it is cool to at least speculate and have some fun while we're at it looking at these new cards. I wouldn't expect too many more to be revealed in the coming weeks. But certainly we get to start brainstorming and like hoping and theory crafting and maybe making things up in our head in the meantime with the limited information we have. So before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. It helps out a ton. And if you're looking for some more content from me, check out the Patreon as well. There's a link in the description. All right. So there are some new mechanics. I don't believe this will be all of them, but the first is pilots and / leaders are upgrades. So some of the leaders, all the ones that we're going to cover today, are actually upgrades. So when they deploy, they can deploy as leaders or they can deploy as upgrades and attach to a vehicle. There are also some standalone pilot cards. These are hybrid cards that are either units or upgrades that attach to specifically vehicles. And no vehicle can have more than one pilot unless otherwise indicated. So these pilots are, it's modal and it's really cool. The leaders themselves, very interesting. We're going to cover 3 different leaders today, 2 spotlight ones and one other one that was revealed. So kind of dig more into the nitty gritty when I cover the cards. The second new mechanic is indirect damage. So this is damage that is you can't prevent it. So unpreventable damage. So Lurking TIE Phantom can actually take indirect damage, and your opponent gets to decide where this damage goes and can either deal it to their base or to any units they control. So you don't have that much agency over what you do with indirect damage, but it is unpreventable, and it comes at probably a bit less of a cost, is my guess, than direct damage. And lastly, what we saw were new tokens. There's going to be an X-Wing and a TIE token unit now, so that's cool. We can expect tokens to be featured in this set as well. So the Spotlight leaders, we got Han and Boba, and this will be the 3rd Han, the 3rd Heroism Han as well, and the 3rd Boba we have, although one of the Bobas was Heroism, 2 were Villainy, and 1 is now suspended. So it's actually going to be the only legal Villainy Boba. The Han is also yellow, so we're going to have 2 yellow Heroism Hans now. So this is we're going to talk about both these leaders now, and then the starter or the Spotlight exclusive cards that come with these packs, and then a few other cards as well. So first up, Boba Fett. So the leader side says when you deal non-combat damage, you may exhaust this leader if you do deal 1 indirect damage to a player. And then it says what that does. That player assigns 1 unpreventable damage among their base and units. So if you have cards that deal indirect damage, non-combat damage, sorry, not indirect, non-combat damage, then you can trigger this. So something like P38, for instance, deals a damage to a unit. It is a non-combat damage. You can exhaust this and deal indirect damage, right? Daring Raid, deal 2 to something, then you can exhaust Boba, right? So anything that does not involve combat that deals damage. So Ruthless Raider. A lot of these cards are cards that are actually in the really popular Jango Tarkintown deck right now. There are a lot of similar style cards are going to affect this because it's damage that comes from units, although this also works damage that comes from events. So it can trigger pretty frequently, but 1 indirect damage isn't insane value, right? So you can't decide where it goes, so your opponent can always choose to do it to the thing that matters the least. But it is it doesn't cost an action, and it can add up over time, especially with things that synergize with indirect damage. Now, he is a Villainy aggression leader, by the way. The epic action, it's a 6 cost deploy. Now, when you deploy this guy, you can see on the unit side, kind of looks a little weird, where like there's numbers both on the top and the bottom of the card. The top numbers, the 4 and the 7, are what the stats if you just choose to deploy Boba Fett as a unit. And he would just come out as a 4/7 that costs 6, and he actually has absolutely no effect, so he would just be vanilla. Nothing happens when you deploy him as a unit, but of course you can choose to do it, especially if you don't have a vehicle in play to attach him to as an upgrade. So, but the upgrade stuff is definitely the more interesting thing to do with him. If you have a vehicle that it does not currently have a pilot attached to it, you can deploy this guy as an upgrade to that vehicle, and when he deploys, you deal up to 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of units. So it's a kind of like a mini overwhelming barrage that comes out. He also gives the vehicle +4/+4, so it is a massive upgrade to a vehicle, plus dealing 4 divided over units is a very powerful deploy. Now, there is downsides, of course, to deploying something as an upgrade. It means that if your opponent destroys the unit, you get 2 for 1, right? You lose your leader and the vehicle. Now, important thing to note here with the leaders specifically, not the other pilots, but the leader pilots, it says attached unit is a leader unit, and leader units means certain things don't affect them. Things like waylay, for instance. Let's say you can return a non-leader unit to its owner's hand. You cannot waylay a Boba Fett that has been attached to a vehicle. You can't vanquish a Boba Fett that has been attached to a leader unit, right? You can't merciless contest. If it's the only unit in play, it is a leader, and merciless contest does not hit leaders. So nothing that would affect leaders works, but you can like rivals fall it, right? And then you would lose the unit and the upgrade at the same time. You get 2 for 1, or power of the dark side would still hit it, right? Or just attacking it with a big unit, right? That would still work. And you are putting like 2 eggs in one basket, but you get a lot for it, right? Massive stat bonus, +4/+4, plus the 4 damage. The types on this guy: Underworld, Bounty Hunter, Pilot, but that, I believe the types only matter when he is deployed as a unit. I don't believe the types change the type of the vehicle you attach it to, although I'm not actually sure about that. Past that, yeah, I think this guy's pretty cool. There's going to be some synergies that work with the indirect damage that he does that is going to matter. But that is a massive amount of potential. And remember, this is Boba Fett, which means Fett's fire spray from set 1 is always enabled by this guy and actually synergizes pretty well, right? You can play a Fett's fire spray and then attach this to Fett's fire spray, making a 9/10 that is readied to go, ready to rumble. Of course, might not always line up having to play like fire spray first, but this is an interesting mechanic. Now, there's one other downside to pilots I haven't mentioned yet, but they are upgrades, and upgrade removal gets them. And I know it's a lot of jokes right now about confiscating your leader, and it is true. You can pay 1 to confiscate this, and then it does defeat the leader. And other upgrade hate, especially main deckable upgrade hate, things like aggression and double red, I consider that a very main deckable card. Confiscate, usually not, but it might be if pilots are all over the place, and then things like disabling Fang Fighter. That is a little bit of a downside. Now, it is important that you can deploy these leaders as units, actually, because you don't want to always play into the potential upgrade hate. All right, the other spotlight leader is Han Solo, so it's another yellow heroism Han. His leader ability says action exhaust, reveal the top card of your deck, then attack with a unit. If the revealed card and that unit have different odd costs, that unit gets +1/+0 for this attack. Bit of a mouthful here. So you flip the card and then you have to attack with the unit, and you would then, if like for instance your unit is an odd cost and it costs 3, and you reveal a card that costs 5, that unit then gets +1/+0 for the attack. If you reveal a card that costs 3, though, they would have the same odd cost and it wouldn't get the buff. Of course, if you reveal an even card, it also wouldn't get the buff. So to get this enabled frequently, of course, the deck needs to be entirely odd or almost entirely odd, and we'll see with the deploy as well. This is a major build around. You're going to want your deck basically entirely odd costed to make this guy really hum. The ability on the leader side doesn't feel very powerful to me because not only is it the odd requirement, but like the different odds. So if you're probably going to have like a lot of 3 costs in your deck, that's usually like going to be, I think, the most dense unit cost in a deck like this. And then if you reveal a 3, when you attack with your 3, it's not even going to get buffed. So it seems kind of situational for a pretty marginal upgrade of +1/+0. But let's check out the deploy. So he is a 5 cost. He's a Rebel pilot. Rebel's pretty cool. He's a 3/7. So he is textless, but he does flip into a 3/7. And that is a pretty prominent stat line at 5 cost we've seen. But then, yeah, he attaches to a vehicle. That attached unit is a leader unit. And when he is deployed as an upgrade, it gives the unit +3/+4. Again, a hefty boost. And it says for each friendly unit or upgrade that has an odd cost, ready a resource. So it itself is an odd costed upgrade. So at the very least, you could ready 1 resource. But if you have like 2 units in play, like a 1 cost and a 3 cost, or a 3 cost and a 5 cost, as long as you've spent resources before you deployed Han, you're going to ready some. And I think readying 2-3 resources could be pretty reasonable. So this a little bit enables a major flip turn in the vein that Boba Fett from the first set, the villain Boba Fett, was doing, right? Where he would create like a flip turn where he was making 8 resources on the 5 resource turn by using his ability a couple times. So in here, you could potentially do that too, right? You spend your 5 resources on like a 5 cost odd unit, you flip Han. If you have 2 odd units and the leader himself is an upgrade, you will ready 3 resources, and then you can play another 3-drop and create an 8 resource mega turn on this flip turn. And it can obviously be even more, right? If you have 5 things, it'll flip and ready 5. You could do a 10 resource turn. I don't think that's going to happen too often, but there's a pretty big ceiling here. The floor, at the minimum, it should ready 1 resource, or probably 2, because it has to attach to a unit. So as long as the unit is odd, I think like the floor is really, it readies 2. And that's pretty cool. I think you create a pretty nice like tempo boost with this leader. It is a 1-shot thing. It doesn't happen on the attack, for instance, the way Boba did. But I think this is like a major build around leader. Be interesting to see how consistent a deck that is entirely odd costed will be. The first turn, you would almost surely want to be playing a couple 1-drops because of this, and then go into the 3 on the 4 resource turn. What are we trying to play? Like a 3 and a 1? Are we playing just a 3 and like our 4 resource turn is not very strong? Are we going to include some even cards? Maybe in a mono yellow deck, you probably just include Cunning there, and then you do have the risk of like not hitting all the time, but I think that's probably okay if you're including like some major power cards, like something with Cunning. So this is a very interesting build around. The Boba looks like it's going to have less deck building constraints to go off, because of course like the flip is just massive. It just deals 4 around, and then I think there's just a lot of like very good cards that incidentally also proc Boba's indirect damage ability, like any red removal and any units that enter play and deal damage. So I think his will be more like incidentally good with a lot of things where Han you really need to build around. All right, we're going to go through the starter cards. So Fett's Fire Spray. We got another Fett's Fire Spray. This one costs 4. It's a villainy only card. It's a 4/4 Underworld Vehicle Transport, and it says when played and on attack, deal 1 indirect damage to a player. If you control Boba Fett, deal 2 indirect damage instead, which, you know, is actually kind of 3 indirect damage if you think about it with Boba, the villain Boba, because his ability would proc off of this. So Fett's Fire Spray is a 4/4 for 4 that deals 3 indirect damage when it comes into play. That could be pretty powerful. That in very many cases might mean some damage to the opponent's base if they don't want to pour all that damage into like a unit that they have, thus losing the unit. It also has the on attack. So this is representing 3 indirect damage every time it attacks. So it's going to be a very high priority target to remove. 4/4 for 4 in space is a solid stat line. So I think this card is quite solid in the Boba Fett deck. I don't think we're playing this in any other deck for the most part. I don't think 1 indirect damage is very good. 3 is much better, right? And it is essentially 3 when you play it with Boba Fett. So Seems just like the other Fire Spray to be locked behind a Boba Fett deck, and you're probably going to play both of them in a Boba Fett deck. And this card looks, compared to like most spotlight only or starter specific cards, is quite powerful. And now we're going to see Han's counter to Fett's Fire Spray. It's another Millennium Falcon. This is a heroism only Millennium Falcon, and it's a 3-cost 3/4, so same stats as the legendary Millennium Falcon from set 1. It's a Rebel vehicle transport, so Rebel is really nice because the OG Millennium Falcon is not a Rebel. It doesn't work with things like Wing Leader and Fleet Lieutenant and Dodonna and other buffs. It says you may play or deploy one additional pilot on this unit. So remember, pilots, once they're deployed onto a vehicle, no more. But this does allow more. We're going to see a few pilot cards that are not leader in a moment, but if pilots... This seems like a little bit of a buff. Now that's going really all in onto one unit if you're going to try to put 2 pilots on this, but you have the option, and it does get buffed for every pilot on it, +1, +0. But this one does not seem nearly as locked to like the Han deck the way the Fett's Fire Spray does. There's nothing specifically calling out to the Han. It is an odd card, so of course it works well there, and it is just a well-statted card. And you know, Han is a pilot, so he can jump into this and then buff it. It would essentially get +4/+4 because Han would give it +3/+4. But the Millennium Falcon also looks like a really solid space unit. I'm really interested to see how the Rebel tag on this matters because we haven't gotten a lot of new Rebels in general since set 1, especially not very powerful ones. And this is quite a good space unit stat-wise. And as long as I think you get a little bit of like the pilot incidental value from it, it could be quite strong. All right, another starter card, and this is a pilot. It's Bosk. It's a 4-cost cunning villainy card. He is a 4/4 as a unit. So, of course, these pilots, you can play them as units. You don't have to attach them to vehicles. And he has an on-attack ability, exhaust the defender and deal 1 damage to it. So if he attacks into a unit, he will exhaust that unit and deal 1 damage to it. Now, that's not great. Like, as a unit, 4/4 for 4 with that ability, I wouldn't be playing that in basically any deck. The thing is, the fact that it's a split card definitely raises the floor, right? Because you're not always going to be able to attach this as a pilot, and maybe late in the game, you might just want like to go wide and play extra units. So having it as like your upgrades, like this is primarily something you want to play as an upgrade, but its fallback plan will be not an exciting unit, but like a fine unit. That's pretty cool. And the pilot cost is 2, so it's only 2 to equip it. And it's also a cunning villainy card, and it says attach unit gains. It's the same ability on attack, exhaust the defender and deal 1 damage to it, and it gives +2/+2. So it's a 2 cost that gives +2/+2 and that ability, which will let your space unit, or actually could be a ground vehicle too, really trade up because it essentially can do +3 to the defender, and then if it doesn't finish it, it exhausts it, which is usually most useful against leaders that have a chunky health pools. So you're able to like attack into them and exhaust them. It's an Underworld Bounty Hunter pilot for the traits. Bosk, I'm not like majorly excited about. I think it's fine. It doesn't look great to me. I don't love that like the premise here is that you're like buffing a unit, but then you have to use that unit to get like the benefit of the on attack. You have to like attack it into something. And I really, when you're buffing things, I usually rather just go face. And if you're attacking into a unit, you're probably just clearing it anyway. So the exhaust part of it seems less good, unless of course it's into a leader. But Bosk only seems fair to me. Chewbacca, on the other hand, is a card that really scares me. This is a 5-cost command heroism. It is a 5/6. So he's a 5/6 for 5, and it says this unit can't be defeated or returned to hand by enemy card abilities. So that means no hard removal and no bounce like Waylay, right? It can't get waylaid, it can't get vanquished, it can't get Power of the Dark Sided. It's kind of like Lurking TIE Phantom, except Lurking TIE Phantom also prevents damage from card abilities. So things like Open Fire or Force Choke, stuff like that. Those will still get onto Chewbacca. He's a Rebel Wookiee pilot, so Rebel is quite interesting for a big chunky unit. But the real scary part to me here is the pilot. Equips for 3, and a command and heroism are the aspects on it. You play it on a vehicle, and it gives the vehicle the same ability. This unit can't be defeated or returned to hand by enemy card abilities. It also gives it +3/+3. For 3 cost, this looks very similar to me to Shadowed Intentions from set 3, which is notably a +0/+0 upgrade that has a very similar effect. It can't be defeated by enemy card abilities or returned to hand. But this also buffs it +3/+3, and you can play a turn 1 vehicle like an A-Wing, put this on it, turn it into a 4/6, for instance, that now can't be bounced or removed by events. Basically, they have to attack it with units or use multiple damage-based removal, things like open fire, right? And since you're buffing +3/+3, damage-based removal doesn't usually work anymore because the unit is going to have way too much health. This is horrifying to me to like see a play pattern that might potentially devolve into like turn 1 vehicle, turn 2 equip this. Maybe you're taking 12 over 2 turns if you're lucky. I expect there's going to be more interaction that we'll see into like the piloting and into the vehicle stuff, and like maybe there is like just removal that like works better. I mean, upgrade removal of course will work against the upgrade part of this, but this one looks really powerful to me. It, like I said, it looks a little bit like Shadowed Intentions to me, except Shadowed Intentions notably does not buff attack and health, so like you're using a lot of resources there just to prevent interaction, while this gives you the like +3/+3. We're talking like Jedi lightsaber, Fallen lightsaber, General's blade. Like these upgrades are the ones that cost 3 and give +3/+3, and this is doing that, but also making it very, very difficult to interact with the unit that you equip this to. So the one downside, of course, it has to be a vehicle, so you can't equip to anything. But I think you're probably going to want to try to have as many turn 1 vehicles in the deck that plays Chewbacca on turn 2. And then it's got the fallback plan of being a 5/6 for 5 that also just can't be removed with things that most of the time interact with big chunky units, right? Like the downside of playing 5 cost chunky units that don't do anything is that they often just get you set up to be removed immediately, but Chewie does prevent at least some of the removal from interacting with it. All right, the next starter card or spotlight card, No Disintegrations. It's a 3 cost villainy aggression event. It's a plan. It says deal damage to a non-leader unit equal to 1 less than its remaining health. So it sets a unit to 1 HP, basically deals damage to it. I don't love a card like this at 3 cost. For this to be better than open fire, it's going to be needing to do at least 5 damage. So you need to target this to something that has 6 or more health. The problem is it doesn't remove the unit, so you're already using a card just to get it into removal range. They get an action to use the unit. I know with like the indirect damage stuff, so like if you're, the one caveat here is with the Boba leader, if they only have 1 unit in play, this will kill any unit because well, actually no, it won't. Sorry, I'm correcting myself, because the indirect damage can go onto the base. So even in that case, they don't have to assign the last indirect damage to the unit. So almost talked myself into liking it a little bit, but no, I don't think I'm into this too much. Of course, like there's like giant units all over the place. I mean, this plus something else can finish it off. Like Boba's flip does work pretty well with this because you can then assign 4 damage, so you'll only need 1 to finish off whatever unit that this poked into. But of course, it doesn't do it to leaders, which is another downside. So I don't love this one. And the last spotlight card we'll see is Never Tell Me the Odds. It's a cunning heroism event. It's a gambit. It says discard 3 cards from an opponent's deck and 3 cards from your deck. Deal damage to a unit equal to the number of cards with an odd cost discarded this way. So if you're building your deck full odd, you're doing at least 3. And then you're getting a little bit of a bonus from your opponent. You can say, if we get 1 from your opponent, we've turned this into an open fire. If we get 2 or 3, then it's much better. It's nice that I think from what way I'm reading this is you get to see how much damage it's going to do before you have to name a target. So in that case, if your opponent has like a 3 health and a 5 health unit, you can like wait to see if it's going to do 5. So that's how I believe this works. It's fine. I mean, Cunning doesn't have a lot of like removal, and this is removal. It should do minimum 3 damage if you're building your deck full odd, right? I mean, I don't know if you're going to be able to build a deck 100% odd cost, but if you do, it's at least 3. So you should be able to bank on like 3 to 4 damage at a floor. I don't love that it's inconsistent. I don't love that you're like both paying there's like a deck building cost, and then the ceiling doesn't seem high enough to me. Like, I would have liked the floor here to be like 4 damage if you build your deck correctly, because then you're getting like open fire at baseline. But there's chances where you're only doing 3 damage, even less sometimes, and I don't think like the upside of sometimes dealing 4, 5, or 6. And of course, that's going to be entirely dependent on how your opponent builds their deck, if they're playing with a lot of odd cards, and in that case, it's a little too inconsistent for my taste. All right, we got another leader. So this is a rare leader. So this is not from any spotlight. It's Asajj Ventress. It's a vigilance villainy leader. It has an action: deal 1 damage to a friendly unit. If you do, deal 1 damage to an enemy unit in the same arena. Kind of like that ability. It's free. It's free to use. Of course, you have to deal 1 damage to your own unit. If you have no units in play, you can't use this ability. So it is an if-then. Like, you don't get the 1 damage on your opponent if you don't do 1 to yourself. But there are going to be some units that you like. There are like the grit villainy blue units that have grit, so like they kind of want to soak up some damage. And I kind of like being able to just like free ping when needed. It makes playing into like 1 health units much cleaner because you can just like remove them with this ability. It makes trading a little more streamlined. So it looks like a pretty nice ability if you have the right units to pay off with its effect. It deploys as a 6 cost, and it's a 4/6 with grit as a unit, which is that's not very good as a unit. 4/6 grit for 6 cost. I don't love it. But as the attach ability works, it says attached unit gains grit, gets +3/+4, and it has an on attack. You may deal 1 damage to a friendly unit. If you do, deal 1 damage to an enemy unit in the same arena. So similar to its leader effect, although you can deal the 1 damage to itself, which does actually then buff its attack by 1 because it would have grit. That's pretty cool. This one looks a little more like I would need more things that want self damage. We need more vehicles too that we would want to play in Villainy Blue. There's not a ton. So I find that like right now it would probably be pretty difficult to even like deploy this as a pilot. But I'm almost certain we're going to get a bunch of vehicles in this set in general. It is the vehicle set. So not going to like pass any judgment there. The unit itself also has some cool traits. It's Force, Knight, Bounty Hunter, and Pilot. So this one looks very build aroundy, and we're going to have to see kind of what we get in this set to play around with it. All right, we got a few other cards shown. This is a 2 cost Cunning Villainy unit. It's Zygarian Starhopper. It's a vehicle space unit, 2/3 Underworld vehicle fighter. It says when defeated, deal 2 indirect damage to a player. So they would assign 2 unpreventable damage among their base and units. That's okay. The indirect damage, again, like we have to remember that a lot of the indirect damage, unless you get to like a critical mass of it, may be kind of irrelevant because, you know, they have a 3 health unit or something, they put the 2 into it and then they trade it, and like that 2 indirect damage didn't matter at all, right? So like there's a lot of cases where the indirect damage won't do much, but if you have enough of it where they have to start pouring damage into their base or they start losing units, then it becomes much more interesting, right? And this, again, with Boba, like any indirect damage or any damage you deal that isn't combat damage, you're doing +1 with that. So this dies and does 3 indirect damage, which is much more. That stuff starts adding up because then they start having to like put damage into the base because they can't like damage sponge all their units. And that's like what, like this indirect stuff definitely looks to be much better with Boba, who gets to power up that. And we might even see more synergies with indirect damage because I can't imagine he's the only leader that will care about it, but who knows. We've got another indirect damage card. So this is a 4 cost aggression card. It's Hunting Aggressor. It's a 3/6 space unit, so pretty hefty health pool for a 4-cost unit. It's an underworld vehicle transport. It says indirect damage you deal to opponents is increased by 1. So as the last one too, they're both in underworld units, which does matter also with like Cat Bane and McClunky. So another thing, like underworld is a pretty good trait to have. There's some other cards that might care about that as well. And yeah, this says indirect damage you deal to your opponents increased by 1. So like Boba's ability now deals 2, and then all these other units that like die, like the one we just saw, would deal +1. So pretty interesting. Like this, it's a very slow card because it's a 4-cost with pretty low power for a 4-cost unit. It's pretty difficult to remove. The effect itself probably won't be used the turn you play it, but it might, if especially later in the game. But it's pretty slow, but it is kind of like a value grind where like if you get a couple extra indirect damage from this, it's really going to start adding up, because like we said, the more you start spamming indirect damage, the better it's going to be. Like it's not very good in little bit. Like you want a lot of this stuff to really start pouring damage into your opponent's base so that they can't put it on all their units. Next up, another underworld vehicle. It's a 3-cost Cunning. It's a 3/3 Death Space Skirmisher. Underworld vehicle fighter. It says when played, if you control another space unit, you may exhaust a unit. So it's like a slightly bigger Cartel Spacer. Cartel Spacer, of course, needed a yellow unit, and then you can do it. And this just needs another space unit. And this also has no cap. Cartel Spacer can only exhaust units that cost 4 or less. This seems pretty cool. Like this can exhaust leaders, and again, that's incredibly powerful, being able to delay a leader. And it's an underworld, so it would work with like Cad Bane's ability. So this has some potential as like a tempo-based space unit, and yeah, I'm all for it. And then we've got Tandem Assault. So this is a 1-cost command event, and in the long line of these cards like Rebel Assault and Outflank, it does let you attack with 2 units. This one says attack with a space unit. If you do attack with a ground unit, and that ground unit gets +2/+0 for this attack. So you do need a ground and a space unit for this to kind of work. But then it's similar to Rebel Assault in the case that Rebel Assault gives both units +1 attack. This one would give the ground unit +2. So same amount of like total damage. Going to base with this would be basically the same. This allows a really big ground trade up if you need it to, because it's +2. So this seems solid if the deck is configured in such a way that this is easy to trigger. Whereas like Rebel Assault is like, the whole deck is rebels, it's like pretty clean to trigger, where here you need some kind of like combination of ground and space, and it might not always line up. But I think this has a lot of potential in the same way that Rebel Assault does, primarily because of the +2 that this gives, right? Outflank, for instance, has not made waves because it doesn't get, although the restriction is much easier, the upside is also way lower. All right, last, I just wanted to show the new token. So we got a TIE Fighter. It's a 1/1 token vehicle fighter. It does not have Imperial trait, and the X-Wing is a 2/2 vehicle fighter. It does not have Rebel trait. So unfortunately, that kind of synergy is not going to be enabled by these tokens, but that's them right there. We do also have experience and shields in this set, so they're coming back for set 4. All right, so it's pretty exciting to already get some stuff. It's very early. Can now begin to speculate wildly about all the things this means. I'll keep tabs on more previews as they come in. I don't expect them for a little while. I'm working on a Watt Timbre Green video that will probably premiere in a few days, or not premiere, just, be released in a few days. So keep an eye out for that. It's a really cool deck. And of course, if you want some more decks from me or live updates to decks that I've made videos on, stuff like that, do check out the Patreon. And yeah, that's it. Until next time, take care.